Yeah, I joined. Okay. Okay. All right. So I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Governing Board. The time is now 7:05. Let the record show all 5 board members are present. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, indivisible. And thank you, Mrs. Ordway, for that. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye, sorry. Is there any opposed? Okay. All right. Motion carries 5-0. Governing Board reports. Mrs. Ordway, would you like to start us off this evening?
No.
Okay.
However, I will.
Thank you.
I just think that Miss Fisher must feel bad that she usually doesn't get to go first. I'm just saying.
Do I need to bring the popsicle sticks I had in my classroom?
No,
and
I'm really fine because you'll fill in my blanks. So anyway,
Okay.
so we'll start with, I had the opportunity, Jim, close your ears, to sign up for one of my volunteer sign-ups with Donuts for Dad at Sonoran. I told you to close your ears. At Sonoran Foothills. And I believe it was 77 dozen donuts that were distributed to adults. The bananas and the apples went to the children. I'm just pointing that out. At the very same time, they had their Friday, or whatever the day was, I believe it was a Friday, assembly, which ended up turning into a really cool assembly for our teacher, Marianne Colley, who I did get to meet Baxter, the mascot. She ended up becoming the teacher of the Diamondback Teacher of the Year, which was unbelievable, and she just was so excited about it. Anyway, so there was a really cool thing that happened. So when you're at the right place at the right time, it works out. Also, I had the opportunity to go to Constitution Day at Diamond Canyon, where they do talk about the Constitution, and we also had the veterans there, and that was a really nice thing to get to know some of the local veterans and hear their stories and how they appreciate the fact that we are keeping history alive with our kids. Congresswoman Debbie Lesko was at Boulder Creek High School, and I declined to accept that invitation, as I was sure that our staff would give her that real view of what true traditional public education is. Traditional public schools are the choice still for over 85% of students, and it's not all just because that's the easiest place to go. It's because of the programs that we and opportunities that we offer our students and our staff. I know I'm going along, but let's see what else. Greenbrier, I think we have a teacher there named Linda James that's been there for 41 years. And heck, what did she do this or last year? She had the highest growth score for fifth graders in the district in ELA. Greenbrier, did I say Bella? Okay. All right. And then, not last but not least, because there's like a million other things I did, but the football game for me last week was the Bulldogs against Deer Valley, because it's been a really long time since Goldwater has won a game against Deer Valley, and I think the amount of years is 13, and they actually did it. But more important than that was another veteran celebration. They had parachutists that came down with the flags, and they honored every person in the armed forces that was employee, community member, staff member, and parents of one of our students that was killed in Afghanistan were there. And it was just so touching to know that even though we're big and it's 2018, we still do these things. according to our Constitution, and it's just awesome. Anyway, I think that's it. Although I do have a longer list, I'll stop now.
Thank you,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Ordway. And I assume the apples and bananas went to the students because children need good nutrition and adults are already a lost
Oh,
cause?
No,
Is
no,
that
no,
it?
that's not it at all.
Did I
It
miss
is
something
because
there?
the adults were already throwing their apple cores out on their way in to then have the donut. And the students were not only going out to the assembly, but they were going out to their track meet too. Just saying,
Thank you for clarifying that. Mrs. O'Brien.
if Jim was listening.
Thank you so much. Ditto on a few of the things that Mrs. Ordway said. I do want to just touch again, though, on how exciting it is to see our schools continue to teach our kiddos about the Constitution and honoring and respecting the men and women who serve this country. So that is just, I know that there's a lot of talk out there that we don't teach that in public school, and I would say quite to the contrary, as evidenced on a regular basis in all of our schools. It was, I'll try to go through this quickly, an honor to be at our parent organization president's luncheon, where we had standing room only, which then turned into, I think, to certainly extra chairs and at least one extra table. So thanks to Jim and facilities for getting that out really quickly. The conversations with Kurt, two of them, one at Elevate, thank you to them, and one at Copper Creek. The attendance there was also phenomenal, and the participation. So again, kudos to parents and community members for turning out for those things. Was honored to be invited by a parent who nominated Mrs. Leslie Harris for Mac and Gatos tribute to a teacher, and so they honored her from KTAR 92.3, and she was awarded a $1,000 check for her service as a teacher, and she's been teaching for nearly 25 years, I believe, is her number. So awesome job. She's at Norterra. I hope I said the right school there. Was able to attend Stetson Hills National Elementary and Junior Honor Society induction, and that's where my kids went, so that has a little special place in my heart. Appreciate that. Last night, we were able to, Mrs. Ordway and I attended the Arizona School Boards Association Maricopa County West meeting, and I'd like everybody to give Mrs. Ordway a round of applause as she was awarded the Turquoise Star Award for receiving over 300 hours of professional development and bringing that back to share with her community. So thank you. I would like to ask Mrs. Taylor if she would post the October 15th School Health Official Education Series, or otherwise known as SHOES event. I've registered for that. I know that Mrs. Frank said she was going to. I don't know if anybody else will be there, but just wanted to ask that. And then I also looked out to see if it was yet on a future agenda, but wanted to reiterate the request made by Mrs. Ordway to discuss our superintendent's ability to seek legal service on the agenda. So I don't know if you've already kind of got that on there. I couldn't see it online anywhere, but I'd like to second her request.
Okay, we do not at this time, so we will put that on a future
It's in
agenda.
our Google
Is
Doc,
it in your
so-
Google Docs?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, just wanted to verify that, and again, and thank you, Monica, for bringing the CTE. Sorry, Mrs. Allred, for bringing the CTE program. I had no idea it was here for 27 years, and I remember my first year on the board meeting a student who was about to graduate and told me that because she had gotten her certificate for being a CNA, she was going to be able to go to NAU. Because she was putting herself through school. She already had a job, and so that was how she was going to be putting herself through school at NAU. So that's an awesome program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. Mrs. Fisher.
I guess I could just say ditto because on some of the things as well. A lot of the events that I sounds like we've all attended have been very patriotic. And one of the things that I do hear on a regular basis from the public is that kids don't know the pledge, kids don't know, and it is impressive to see that they do. That they are taught to honor our veterans, they are taught the pledge, they are taught the respect. And lately I've been getting a different message from our veterans. In fact, I was in El Paso or in San Antonio when Deer Valley lost to Goldwater, and I got a I got a call from my husband and my son. But my husband did say that how wonderful he felt as a veteran and how honored they were, and how it makes him feel that kids know that his service wasn't, it's not forgotten. Desert Storm wasn't forgotten. Um, the time that he spent, a year away from the family or in harm's way or um, being gassed or the things they go through that our kids aren't forgetting. And I was very pleased just to hear the emotion in my husband's voice. So it must have been a beautiful event because he's not the kind of guy that tears up. However, I've got to say I was very disappointed to find out that the Alamo does have a basement. And Pee Wee Herman was lied to. I had to ask the question, and the guy was very funny to tell me that. The other thing is I wanted to point out with conversations from Kurt and some of these other events and the correspondence that I get from a lot of the LDs is parents want a say in their schools. They want a greater level of conversation. They want a greater level of contact. They want to select what's important to them or at least have some input. And I know I'm always pushing a greater level of correspondence and conversation. I just really want us to possibly get that on a future agenda, that we talk about how can we, is there a way to honor our parents a little bit more? We are very blessed to serve their children, but they are their children, and I think we do a great job serving them. But what I heard a lot from the conversations from her and some of the correspondence I received afterwards was that they just want an input, and so I'd like that to be a future conversation on how we can provide that opportunity to parents. I know it has to be within our budgetary resources, but the parents are asking for it. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Ms. Tweedy.
No report.
Okay. I would also like to congratulate Marianne Colley. I've been in her classroom. She's an amazing teacher, and I'm actually looking forward to, she'll be bringing her students down to the Air Monitoring Division warehouse for a field trip upcoming in October, so looking forward to seeing her again. And that's it for my report. Dr. Finch.
Very nice. Yeah, that was a great ceremony with, we had a dance-off between the two mascots as
It
well.
was awesome.
And I put it live on Periscope, so if you haven't seen it, the mascot from the Diamondbacks was pretty good, though. He ended up pretty much taking down the Bobcat. He had skills. The two things, ditto to a lot of the folks said here already, but I wanted to re-emphasize the student learning growth scores. That was not my idea. That was Dr. Chunis's idea, to bring more honor to our teachers. And so we went and Dr. Smith found those numbers for us, and then we did a certificate, and then I knocked on all those doors. And that was neat because a lot of those I hadn't been into yet. I'm trying to get to 500 classrooms this year, but when I often do it randomly so I don't end up in the same spots. This actually made me find the person, so that was neat, and had some great comments and great pictures, and the kids obviously were super excited that their teacher had the best scores in the district on 4th, 5th, 7th, whatever the topic was. So that was fun to be a part of that. Excited to see that. And then the last thing, just wanted to let you know that Mr. Miglerino and myself have been attending. I've started to attend the EFRG group, which is the political action group. So that that was a major player last year, and so Jim's been a part of that group for a long time, and so I've been putting my toe in that water as well, helping out. And so if there are any political topics that you're interested in, you can send that to me or Jim, and then we'll make sure it gets on the list to talk about with the powers that be. So it's nice to also and to have a seat at the table. That is so important today, and so I'm putting time in that, and that's something that I believe in. So Deer Valley needs to be. We're a player. We need to be a player in the state, and we are politically as well. So I'm looking forward to see what happens this year. So that's my report. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Dr. Finch and Mr. Miglerino, for representing Deer Valley in those conversations and with those groups. Do we have any public comments for tonight? Okay, so no public comments. We'll move on to old business, item 5A, which would be the Deer Valley Non-Traditional School ADE application for alternative school status. If I can get a motion.
I move that the governing board approve the administration's request for the Deer Valley Night Schools non-traditional school ADE application for alternative school status in the 2019-20 school year.
Second.
Okay, is there any new information on this item or any further questions or discussions from board members?
I don't have any questions if there's nothing new.
We did the preview last
Okay,
time.
all right, well, hearing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And I'm looking to, okay, there it is. So please vote electronically. Do you have all the votes? Motion carries 5-0. Item 5B, so that brings us to, I think believe it's 5 of the policies that we voted to table, pending further discussion. I will need a motion.
I move that the governing board conduct a second reading and adopt revised policy DICA as presented.
Second.
And is there discussion on this item?
I sent my notes forward. Everybody has them. If nobody wants to change it or discuss it, that's
Okay.
everybody should
Everybody
have
has
them.
copies of it?
Right, but we
scanned
did
them
not
too.
receive them before this evening.
No.
Right.
Right there.
We couldn't. I
Right.
believe the lawyers made it clear that
Correct.
they,
Right.
that's a one that becomes a meeting.
Correct. I understand.
So
Would you want to explain your thoughts?
Do you want me to explain my thoughts on it?
Please do.
For, I guess, starting from the top, like I've said in the past, I do not like the idea of having anyone else's copyright on our policies. They are our policies and they should belong to us. But if you go down on the third program, on the third paragraph, it is written as a may. We may want to, this is a policy. Policies provide direction for our superintendent and staff. So this is where the board decides, do we want to or don't we? It says we may want to include additional categories, and what would those be if we do? So do we want to put something in there? If we come further down, and you'll see, I just don't think the A through F is necessary. If it's there, it's there. It's not really that important to me. But when we start looking at the substance of A through F, one of the topics that I believe Ms. Tweedy has brought up several times is wanting, and I know I've heard it from our teachers, is what defines a staff. When we say we have a teacher ratio of 17 to 1, and teachers are saying, no, we don't, I have 40 kids in my class, and we're taking that average, I think we need to have a little bit more clarification. What does the pupil-teacher ratios, what is that? Do we need to put something in policy to clarify what it is our expectations are? This is in our financial records on what they're going to look like. Is pupil-teacher ratio, is that class size? Does that include our speech therapists? Because if you start adding speech therapists or reading specialists or others in the calculation, what is really a class size of 30 to 1 becomes a 17 to 1. So what is it that the board wants to see? That's what that note is there for. And the same thing with defining the staff to people. Is it all staff? Are we including our maintenance staff, What does that calculation mean? And do we need that adjusted in here as well? If you look at C and D, it talks about our average teacher salary. I want to know, and this was a big thing that the teachers wanted discussed down at the Capitol, is what is the definition of a teacher? So what definition are we using here as well? Are we defining the teacher as the individual who's standing in the front of the classroom? Or are we including all the other positions as well? So those were my concerns with this policy as it's written, because policies should not be so strict that they handcuff your employees, but they should not be so vague that they mislead your public. And so I would like, when we have these published, our constituents should be able to go, where is their policy? What is their policy? They should be able to grab this document and say, oh, I get what they're saying. And this policy left me with more questions than answers. If you notice the corner note where I said to look up statute, I did look up statute and I did read it. It's as vague as the policy is. So those were my concerns.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Ordway?
So wouldn't it, as opposed to changing the wording in the policy, because we're going to have the word teacher and staff ratio in more than one place, wouldn't it behoove us to have a definition and have that definition as an index or a glossary or something, so when we refer to, that's what we're referring to? Because if we're going to change the wording in each of our policies to do that, it's just so it just seems to me to be so expensive, and it doesn't help stop the ambiguity of it. If we have a definition of what teacher and class ratio is and whatever those sticking points are that are the same throughout all the policies, then I think that would clear it up. And I understand that we want our policies to be our own, but I also do understand that we do get direction and we take the policies from ASBA because they are part of, or we're part of the 200 and something school districts. Strength in numbers, they have these policies looked over by the Arizona Council of School Attorneys. They've never been sued, nor has anything ever been brought up. They try to give us some guidance in how to have our best practices. So I don't know that we need to customize to Deer Valley and take their logo off in order to get these they're passed. I mean, if we have a problem with a definition of a term, then that we decide what the definition is, and then it is that way throughout the whole all the policies we have. I just think it's an amazing waste of taxpayer dollar to take off or not to want to use a policy because it has an SBA logo on it, when for all intents and purposes there's been no problems with their policies.
Right, thank you, Mrs. Ordway. Ms. Tweedy, did you have some thoughts to share?
On the pupil-teacher ratios, is that specific language then in other policies? Do we need to define it outside of this policy for a reason?
I think Ms. Ordway has a fabulous idea. It would be wonderful if we defined it somewhere, and then the remainder of the policies that have something like that refer back to as defined in. That would be a perfect thing. But one thing I do want to point out with is the notifications we receive from ASBA, their free page at the bottom says, you should have your own attorneys look at this. We do not. So I understand Ms. Ordway's concern for taxpayer dollars. There also, some of these changes would not require a legal review because you wouldn't be changing the substance or the spirit of the policy. Companies write policy. I've been writing policy for 15 years. And with the city of Glendale, we wrote policy. With DEMA, we wrote policy. The state of Arizona, we wrote policy. not all policies have to go skin and try because we changed a couple of times. But yeah, I do think having it defined somewhere and having any other policy that has that, just refer back and say as defined in.
I mean,
I think it's great.
I think one of the issues, it looks like about the budget format, and they're looking for more transparency. But then if we don't put our method of calculation for some of this, it's always going to be ambiguous because you can screw around with numbers and make them look anyway. I mean, when you calculate an average, you can leave outliers in and skew the average. I mean, you can always play games with. So I think it's more than just a definition of terms. I think it's saying how you calculated these things that would make it less ambiguous.
So, Dr. Finch, if you could maybe provide some clarity on the relationship that we have with ASBA, specifically regarding the policies, the legal advice, and then perhaps the common understanding of historically what we've had for these terms.
Sure. I have a couple thoughts too on this concept. We are a member, yes, of the Arizona School Board Association, and there is protection from being in the same group. Legally, when we have an issue with our policy or we have a question, we can also call our neighbors because they use the same system. So that's a plus. In Michigan, we didn't have that. We actually ended up having a split system because some folks want to do their own thing, but they don't come here. That's Neola. So at the state school board group and then Neola doesn't come here. This is the only game in town. And anytime you venture off the path, you are putting the district at risk. To Ms. Fisher's point, you can always run it by an attorney to double check. But two thoughts pop up on this concept. One is, and Jim, Mr. Miglorino could jump in here too. One is comparison to other school districts. So if we have a different definition of a teacher and a different definition of student-teacher ratio that is recorded and collected statewide, that messes up all our analytics when we try to do comparisons and have comparative salaries and student-teacher ratio, et cetera, et cetera. So that makes me a little nervous if we want to make up a new definition of the teacher. Yes, the legislature has messed it up, but everybody's in the same mess up. And so our numbers are still the same. So that's the plus of not venturing off and plowing our own trail. I don't know, Mr. Miglorino, do you have any thoughts on that?
President Frank, members of the board, Dr. Fitch, yes, the language that you see here in policy DICA is almost verbatim right from ARS 15903, which is new. And so the information that they're asking for isn't new information. We've been posting it for years. It's already on the budget summary sheet that the boards have approved for years. What's new is that this is going to be posted in a predominant place on our website. So the method and calculation for this information has already been prescribed to us. And we can clarify that if you want, because we would just take it right from the instructions from the budget worksheets that the Auditor General provides each year.
So then we would be on the same page with everyone else. It would just be defined so that our public could say how they get that number. This is how they get it. Correct?
President Frank, Ms. Fisher, yes. So again, we can use the instructions from the budget forms that all this information. It's just that we're taking it out of a larger document, the actual adopted budget, and we're predominantly putting it on the web page. We also post our budget as well as our comprehensive annual financial report, the Auditor General District Spending Report, the worksheets. We post all of that on our budget form one sheet and have for many years. This now requires that we have in some predominant place, so on the front page of our website, this specific information. And thanks to Ms. Allred, that already has been done. So we're doing this now that we're just trying to make sure that it's memorialized in the policy itself.
Thank you, Mr. Miglorino. Are there further questions or comments on this item, or is the board ready to vote? Mrs. O'Brien, did you have something you wanted to add to the conversation? Okay, I wasn't sure. I didn't
I'll
want to cut
save
you
for
off.
later.
Okay, didn't want to cut you off there.
I appreciate it.
All right, well, hearing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed?
Nay.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes 4-1, 4 ayes, 1 nay. So we'll move on to item 5B, and I will need a motion.
Too much stuff going on. I move that the governing board conduct a second reading and adopt revised policy DIE as presented.
Second.
All right, so we'll open this up again for discussion. And Mrs. Fisher, if you'd like to go through your notes. for us.
Again, the same thing. I'm still opposed to blindly accepting someone else's policies. However, I'm good with whatever the board decides. I do believe when you start talking about it, you look under B where it says an auditor or auditing firm hired by a school district may not also receive consulting fees. I wanted to a little bit of clarification from Jim, Mr. Michelino on this one for one, because I know this is very new. This was put in legislation. I know that they are going to be, several of the auditing firms have already, we've had conversations with some of them. They're looking on how this can be adjusted because it's actually very costly and detrimental to the system to have this in place. But one of the things that I do think of is what about the subdivisions in the notes? Because we have, where we will have a subdivision of, say, Heinfeld and Meach that does other work for us. Is that anywhere defined? Is that any guidance come from ASBO regarding that? Has there been any conversation? I know last year we used Heinfeld and Meach as our auditors for our single audit and for our complete audit, but we also used them for our review that we had done. We used them for several other things, and they do have other services that they do provide us. So what can we legally do, and what may we need to put ourselves in policy to ensure that we're working within the law and still maintaining what's in best interest? The other note that I put is what about our trusts? Because I know our trusts are audited regularly. They're audited annually. But those are also done through Valley Schools Insurance Trust. So is there a concern with their trust using, say, Heinfeld and Meach, and we're using Heinfeld and Meach, but then we have that year when we rotate, if they remain using Heinfeld and Meach, is that a concern? And then the other one you answered accidentally when you asked about that, because I just wanted to know if our CAFR was actually posted online. But that's just a note that I was doodling to myself. So those questions would be important for me when I look at this.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Miglerino, do you have some clarification on this?
Certainly,
for us?
yeah. President Frank, Ms. Fisher, and the rest of the board. The interpretation that we're currently receiving is there is no exception to hiring the auditing firm for any consulting services, whether it's by a subdivision of the district or the district itself, because we only write one check, right? So it's a Deer Valley Unified School District check. That has become a little bit problematic because we have utilized the services of our auditing firm for consulting services and actually haven't maybe closed the loop on one of those reports, although I believe it's in its final form. We just haven't been able to close that loop. We have reached out to them to see if they would be willing to present the findings of that report, because it doesn't say that they can't present a report. We just can't pay them any longer. And we've already paid them for the report,
Right.
by the way. It's not that we haven't paid them. We paid them prior to this law becoming in effect. But we cannot engage them. And so it is problematic. House Bill 2663 put all of these parameters in place, and that is something that is being discussed. In fact, you heard Dr. Finch mention that through some of our lobbying efforts, there's some effort to try and clarify some of these procurement new rules, including this one. Unfortunately, there are a limited number of auditing firms that are qualified to do these services, which makes this even more problematic for us to change regularly. But it also makes it problematic because there's not a large group of them to be able to try and influence the legislation to make this change. So and I think it's also worth noting, one of the things that we ask of the firm that we have used, because we have used them for a number of years, is that they rotate the staff because they're such a large firm. So we don't get the same team. So we get a fresh set of eyes that look at our district so that we can make sure that we don't end up in an arrangement where something might be overlooked. So that's how we have addressed that. And we certainly would hope that maybe this provision would change, or we have heard that some of the firms are talking about spinning off their, and creating another entity.
Well,
to be
that's
able to
more
do
what
their
I'm
consult-
referring to when I say subdivisions, not our subdivisions, theirs.
Oh, okay.
Whether they have, if they have, Heinfeld and Leach is the primary audit firm, and then they have Sunset Consulting, DBA, or DBA, which Heinfeld and Leach, so there's the link. So do we need to clarify in here that it includes these other, doing business as within that scope?
President Frank, Ms. Fisher, I don't believe that we do need to, because they would have to create that separation for us to be able to use them. And that's something that we're aware of. So they could create a separate company, and if they created it in such a way that it met the test of it being a truly separate company, then we would be able to engage them. Without them doing that, if they just, tried to do like a DBA arrangement without creating all the rules that would create a separate company, then we would not be required, would not be allowed to be able to use them as a consulting service. And again, this could be short-lived because this may be something that we're working on this upcoming legislative session.
Yeah, I spent time with Karen and asked her about that. My concern is, do we have anything where we need to have disclosure? Would would this need to be linked to disclosure with because part of what happened with Scottsdale was that there was not adequate disclosure that the firm that was hired actually was the sister of the procurement manager or whoever it was within the organization, and all the way up to the superintendent. And so do we need something in there here for disclosure to ensure that we are not inadvertently hiring an organization that in fact is this organization?
President Frank, Ms. Fisher, I think it would be problematic for us to ask that of every vendor that we would use that could be a consultant, but we could do the reverse, right? We could say that when we're specifically asking for our audit contract, to make sure that they disclose any third-party arrangements that they may have, or any affiliations.
Do we need that in policy? Or would that be better in AMG?
I don't believe that needs to be in the policy, my personal opinion, but I do believe that it will become a requirement, and I think that because the Auditor General has to review all of the contracts and provides guidance on the solicitation for issuing the RFQs for auditing services, I would imagine that would be something that they're going to include as this is a new law, as they revisit that. If not, we can always make it a requirement of our own solicitation.
Yeah, I would like to have us do some kind of, it's just my opinion.
It could
Mrs.
just
Ordway?
be put in as a regulation, right? I mean, that portion, that tidbit or that requirement could be just put in there as a regulation and leave the policy as it stands.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that it would necessarily fit in as a board policy.
Right. So it would just be a regulation under, or it could be a regulation underneath the policy stating that. Dr. Finch?
Yep, I think that's where it would fit. But again, I think Mr. Migliano is in this on this right trail. This is going to be changed. This will be changed, and so for the time being, we will make sure that that we're following all the rules, and also they're going to be hawks looking for this. So everyone's on red alert on this one.
Does that answer your questions, Mrs. Fisher,
It does, and
for this
and
item?
I'm of the opinion that we should have our policies be specific, but I'm good with whatever the board decides.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. O'Brien?
I just wanted to clarify because one of the things that Mrs. Fisher brought up was the Valley Schools Trust, but they are now groups and they are a separate entity from us, so that does not fall under this, correct?
President Frank, Ms. O'Brien, that is correct. So it says that we cannot hire them, and for more than 3 years, nor can we hire them if they're our auditors as consultants. When Valley Schools does their annual audit, they are hiring the auditors, so it's not applicable under that situation.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion, or is the board prepared to vote? Hearing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
So the motion carries 4 ayes, 1 nay, and that should be what we have electronically as well. Great. Okay, so we will move on to the next policy, policy DJ on purchasing. Ms. Tweedy, if I can get a motion.
I move that the governing board conduct a second reading and adopt revised policy DJ as presented.
Second.
Okay, so open it up for discussion.
Okay, go over just my notes. If you notice, my note really is actually just a statement at the top, and this is what I wanted to bring to the board, whether or not it is something the board believes we should have in policy. One of the things that has been brought to my attention by multiple constituents is services being sold to the school district by employees through parent groups. And this policy is actually it's written very, very well. However, it does not mention. It says the employees can't, but this is specifically for DJ services. And it's for purchasing services and purchasing ethic policies. But if a principal, let's say a principal has a popcorn company, they cannot be a vendor that the district uses without citing a conflict of interest. However, because our parent groups are separate entities from the district, they can sell their services to the parent group, which thereby also sells it to the district. And it was brought, so it's okay. As a principal, let's say I'm a principal and I have a popcorn company or a DJ service or a whatever. Okay, yeah. I cannot solicit the district to use my services, or I would have to have I'd have to go through the process and say I have a conflict of interest as a principal. However, if my parent group, my PTO booster club, I can sell my services to them because they are technically a separate entity from the district. And my concern, right, and the concern that was brought to me, I believe it was actually brought to both of us a year ago, and it's been brought to me several times since, was is our PTAs, PTOs, boosters being utilized for individuals within the district to sell their services to the district? And I don't know if that's something that we need to clarify in here, because that's when we start getting into the conflict of interest. I'm not sure if that's something that's been brought to the district, because they sometimes contact us individually versus just, and you send them to you, but I don't know that people are doing it.
Although in the case of and I get your point, in the case of a say a PTO president, they're a volunteer, they're not an employee of the
I was
district.
going to say, we can't have a policy over someone that's not our employee.
Well, Well, what I'm trying to understand is
Mrs.
how,
Ordway.
if Principal Q has popcorn, a popcorn company, or her cousin, whomever has it, and I am a PTA, and we are having popcorn for our carnival that is not a school function, how is it that that's being sold to the district? It's a private function.
It's not so much that it's necessarily being sold to the district, it's using their position of power to influence, and just written in procurement. That you can't, like, okay, Dr. Finch is the superintendent of the district. He cannot use his position to compel a PTA to do something. Same thing with the principal. And I don't know, that's kind of what got Scottsdale in trouble, so I don't know if that's something we need to have. And no, you're right, we can't regulate the PTA, and I would never want to anyways. But is there something that our employees need to disclose to protect the district, that they are they're using their position of influence through parents? And I don't know if that's something we need to know.
Is that
Not sure.
is that like an issue that goes on that we have all these complaints about? And I mean, I hear that it's convenient that certain principals are DJs. I hear it's convenient that I can just knock on the door and Principal Q has all the audio equipment that someone needs to use to raise money for their PTA. I've never heard of anybody say, oh, Mrs. So-and-so told me if I don't use you. And I don't even know how prevalent this is. It sounds like an individual situation that might not have been vetted totally.
Dr. Finch, could you or
Oh, I
administrative leadership
yeah.
provide some clarification on this?
I was going to ask Mr. M. I think he might know something about this.
President Frank, members of the board, Dr. Finch. One of the changes that we implemented this year is that everybody signs the conflict of interest form. It used to be a voluntary thing, so you had to identify if you had a conflict of interest. Now you have to declare positively if you have a conflict or not. So if you have a specific interest in a company. So we would know more information as a result of that. It's directly related to House Bill 2663, which generated the change to this policy, but it's not necessarily, it's not spelled out in this policy, the conflict of interest, but that is the legal advice that all districts have received. In fact, the governing board received similar direction, is to be able to provide positively, I do or do not have a conflict of interest. And so that would be the ability for us to be able to notify or be on notice if somebody does have some type of influence. And again, it's not prohibitive for somebody to have a second job, if you will. It's that they can't have they can't make the decision. So we would just have them recuse themselves in the process to make that decision. So if they had, and I think the example was a popcorn company, we would ask the principal to not have any influence in that decision, which I think Ms. Fisher's point is by their title, they have some influence, but we would just ask them to specifically recuse themselves from that decision if they do have a specific interest in the company. And that's the direction that we would provide to our administration.
So is that something that needs to be included in the policy, or is that your administrative guideline to
Yep.
employees? Or
That's where I was going to go. Again, a little more specifics what an AMG is, and I think we already have a lot of this in here. But I think with this law coming into effect, we're going to have to be more specific to correct or influence those decisions that are being made, making sure, as Ms. Fisher noted, that they aren't using their power to acquire business, that the decision has to be outside.
So
I think it's more of a regulation versus a board policy, because it says in here no conflict of interest. So,
Yeah.
but it's the board's decision.
go ahead.
So, parent organizations and school administrators and teachers generally have a positive relationship because they're working together in the best interest of the students. And the parent organizations are their own entities. And they vote on matters like this. So you're voting to hire DJ Q. And while so that administration or teachers, there'd have to be an awful lot of them, I think, to put that pressure on. My concern with going maybe too heavy-handed with an AMG along this line is we find ourselves in a situation down the road where we have been so prohibitive that it causes problems, much like what happened with our teacher tutoring policy. And I think at one point we changed the policy, and by we, I mean whoever the board was at that time, to say, a teacher could not tutor any student that was on their campus for monetary gain. And then not too long ago, we reversed that and made some modifications so that if you were the 5th grade teacher and an 8th grade parent wanted to hire you, then I think that falls within the realm of good things happening. So I don't want us to go so far to one end, whether it is in a regulation, which is where I think it might need to be, because parent organizations are private, separate entities, and they also vote on those matters when they're spending money, usually according to their bylaws. So that's where I'd like to leave it there, and also ask our administration not to be too heavy-handed in any changes that might occur regarding those lines.
Ms. Tweedy, did you have some thoughts?
Okay, I'm just a little bit confused because, our AMGs don't apply to parent organizations, right? Because they're not employees. So
No, it would be
would
under
be our
conflict of
employees.
interest.
Right. I meant implying to our employees. Like, I don't want the AMG to say, if Principal Q is a DJ, they absolutely cannot DJ on their school campus for a PTA event. Does that make sense? So I'm just asking us to be thoughtful and mindful about this concern. I get there's it's the pendulum is swinging all the way to the other direction because, there's always a bad apple at some point or another. And so we, in my opinion, sometimes overreact to what has occurred. I just want us to not do that.
No, I was just trying to clarify. And then the other thing I was clarifying is because with the negative disclosure now, that I was the board member that met with the external auditor this year, and they were saying that we had to declare there was no conflict was the best practice, and we weren't using best practice. So we're still going to do that, though, right?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I was
okay,
just strictly
okay.
talking about the scenario that Mrs. Fisher brought up and trying to provide a different point of view to the conversation, I guess, or
And my concern isn't, because I don't want them heavy-handed either. Our PTAs and boosters and PTOs do a lot for our kids, and we don't want to make it harder. But what concerns me is I don't see, as I read through this policy, it talks about them getting a Class 6 felony or a Class 1 misdemeanor. The law is written very heavy-handed. And what worries me is this policy may protect the district, but will it protect our employees? Is that one declaration that they're going to provide adequate to protect them as well?
Yep.
Because it takes like I said, the individuals who are going to complain aren't going to be the PTA president or the principal themselves. It's going to be the other parent who owns the brother company of the same company that the principal owns. And they won't complain to us. They won't complain to the district. They are going to complain to the ombudsman or the auditor general or the attorney general of inappropriate practices. So I just want to ensure that yes, we have to protect the district, but I think it's our responsibility to make sure we're protecting our employees as well.
President Frank, Ms. Fisher, if I could address that, I think you're right. I think a lot of this wording is straight out of the statute that was written, and it is problematic. I mean, the attorneys are already arguing over it because, as it reads, that anybody that participates in even the payment, so our accounts payable person who's actually writing the check now, who didn't have anything to make any part of the decision to actually make that payment. We received an invoice, and they're just paying the invoice as our practices are, now are subject to some of these things. So this is not, This is not well written. It will have to be revised. It's on the list that we're going to be working on this legislative session. And I just wanted to also clarify that we do have a conflict of interest policy, one for the board and one for staff, that is separate from this policy. That conflict of interest statement actually does generate more of the information related to the conflict of interest and their notification to us that would give them the protection. And again, we are requiring them to complete those forms different than we have in prior years.
You can also assume that the state organization is on this as well with the parent-teacher organizations, reminding them that, as Ms. O'Brien stated, making sure that you're making decisions that are voted upon, recorded, minutes, et cetera, that it's just not a handshake between two people. And that's how Scottsdale got in trouble, and this is why it was written. And yes, the pendulum did swing heavy over.
Does this answer all board members' questions?
Yes.
Okay, then I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye. Sorry.
Nay.
Look myself in the eye.
Don't see it. Okay, so the motion carries with 4 ayes and 1 nay. And we will move on to Board Policy DN. So, Ms. Tweedy, if you have the motion up.
I have FCB.
Just did D, we're on E.
Yeah, I move that the governing board conduct a second reading and adopt revised policy DJ as presented.
Second.
Oh, but it's DN.
It's DN.
It's DN, sorry. That
Uh,
the policy DN as presented.
And I'm going to second, sorry, policy DN
Okay.
fixed.
All right. So, Ms. Fisher, if you'd like to review your notes.
Yeah, okay. Again, my same one stands with the copyright of someone else's policy. The beginning part, I was a little confused with the charter request. Do we have a process for? That's why I kind of just put a question mark charter request. But I would also like a little bit of clarity in, if you go to the second paragraph, does Jim have a copy of my notes? Does Mr. Michelino have a copy of these? Okay. So my biggest concern, if you look at the first full paragraph that we're changing, and you'll see where I put the little line. One of the concerns I have where, and this is common of all school districts, and I think it's because it's not written in policy, is I would like for it to say, or if beneficial for the district, that we should look for the best options. This concern is because a lot of times when we're disposing of school property, it's standard that we just go to auction. We just sell it at auction. Just get rid of it at auction, or we use our vendors and get rid of it at auction, or whatever the case may be. But written in the authorization to get rid of or to dispose of property, there is a provision that if there is a better way to do it, we can choose to do it. And I would like for our policy to give our employees the freedom to think outside the box and make better decisions when it comes to disposal of property. Linked to that comment right there, if you look at the last page where I put, or maybe it's the second page where I put athletics, and then I put uniforms. I put that just kind of to remind myself of a specific example that I could provide to you. One of the things, and I'm not sure how Deer Valley does their uniforms, but a lot of high schools will, they'll cycle their uniforms. New uniforms are bought for the senior class, they're aged out eventually to the freshman class, and then they're disposed of. There is no disposal value for a football uniform or a sports uniform. So a lot of them, they just throw them in the dumpster or the garbage can. One of the things I have seen high schools specifically do is, rather than just disposing of them in the trash can, they will provide them to the sports teams, booster club, to then, the ones I know they're pretty ragged, but believe it or not, young men want to own a ratty old jersey that has their number on it because it's kind of just a cool thing to own. My husband has one I've been trying to slowly kill for years, and he finds it, pulls it out, and hides it again. So for some reason they do. So I would like for our employees to be able to think out of the box and give those uniforms, because they're already out of value. They will fall within this. They could be written up in an appropriate disposal to the Booster Club, which could then sell those jerseys to whoever had that number, whoever wanted something like that. The problem being is most employees are most procurement or individuals in that area aren't aware of what they can do because it's buried into the Department of Administration's rules. I myself tried to use it before and was unable to. In fact, I was going to sell some brand new units to Deer Valley that were, $400 in one of my past positions, and couldn't because it went to auction and sold for $50, which is, cost the district $400. They sold it for $50. It's a significant loss. I don't want our employees to be in that position. So that is my main concern with this policy, and that is the one addition that I would like added to that second paragraph, is that a simple statement that says, or if beneficial for the district, that we should look for best options.
Mr. Miglierino, can you provide some clarification or answer some of Mrs. Fisher's questions regarding this policy?
Certainly, President Frank, Ms. Fisher, and the board, Dr. Finch. I believe what would now be the third sentence of that second paragraph does provide that, and it says, if unusual circumstances render the above methods impractical, the district may employ other disposition methods, including appraisal or barter, provided the district makes a determination that such procedure is advantageous to the district. So I believe the policy already allows for that, and maybe the question is the determination of unusual circumstances. But if we have deemed something to have no value or to have a value less than the cost to actually sell the item, then we can dispose of it. And we can use any other method. The policy, the way it's written, gives us the ability to use another method once that has been determined, the way it's authored currently.
Right, and the way it's written, I've seen employees be confused by it in many districts. That's why I would like clarification in that one, in how we have our policy written. If others don't believe we need clarification to empower our employees, that's okay as well.
Ms. Frank,
Mrs. Ordway.
about the same suggestion as the other ones, perhaps the clarification, I don't know where you put it, but AMG, staff meeting, wherever it would go, so we're all aware that there are other options, keeping in mind that, let's just make sure it's communicated as either, however you guys see fit, regulation, AMG, information, but I don't know that it needs to, we need to change a policy in order to explain what the sentences mean. I think we clarify what the sentences mean.
Ms. Tweedy.
I think I interpreted it the same way as Mr. Miglierino. I don't understand. I mean, if we determine a procedure is advantageous or this is beneficial to the district, I mean, those two statements mean the same thing. I don't understand why one would be empowering and one would not be empowering.
I just think that,
I think those two things
from what I hear Ms. Fisher saying, is she wants people to understand what it means so
Well, it's
that
not a
things are
matter
not
of-
thrown away. And I don't know what districts you're referring to, but maybe in Deer Valley it's been our practice, and that's what we already do, because we got some band teachers in here that might already know how that stuff works.
No,
But
actually, it's several people in Deer Valley that have expressed concern over this to me. So no, it's currently not a given practice. It's kind of like you turn a widget. You turn a widget right, you turn a widget right, you turn a widget right. As long as you're expected to turn the widget right, you turn it right. When you're told you can turn the widget whatever direction you need to, because you know what's best in the situation, you'd be amazed how empowering that is. Um, the ability, this is actually kind of pretty clear out of some of the other documents that it stems from, but it's not, they're not encouraged to think out of the box. And I would prefer they be empowered that way. That's just my preference.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fisher. If there's no other questions, comments, or clarification needed, I will call for the vote. All those. Okay, hearing none, I will call for the vote now. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Please vote electronically. The vote is up. So the motion carries 4 ayes, 1 nay. And that brings us to the last policy for this evening, policy FCB, retirement of facilities. I believe, Ms. Tweedy, you have the motion.
I move that the governing board conduct a second reading and adopt revised policy FCB as presented.
Second.
Again, I'm concerned with rewording this. I don't see that there's an adequate community input in our policy, and I think by policy, even though community and parent input is not necessarily by policy written by ASBA or other groups, I believe personally as a board member that it is important to emphasize that we have community and parent input, and I would like to see that added into this policy in a more concise way.
Ms. Tweedy?
I would actually voice support for what Ms. Fisher's saying on this policy. I think when you close a school facility or repurpose or anything, I think based on the history that I've witnessed, you probably need a protection like that in the policy.
President Frank, if I may interject, Arizona Revised Statute 15341, specifically Section 32, defines what we have to do, specifically related to the closing of the school. I agree it's probably not clearly stated in here, but we would be bound by it, and it is noted as a reference at the bottom of the policy.
I think but that's a minimum requirement. We could always go above what they're requiring us to do.
President Frank, Ms.
community
Tweedy,
input.
it is a minimum requirement, but it is pretty extensive as well. But it is a minimum requirement.
Yeah, I would say community involvement, though, especially notifying the community when it's in the discussion phases as opposed to.
Done deal.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Mrs. Ordway?
Dr. Finch or Jim, would you care to find that
Anytime
statute that we're bound? Because it is quite extensive. It is quite prescriptive. And I don't know that we need to duplicate it in this policy because it's already in a statute. It's referred to it, but if you could just go over what the minimum means, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. President Frank, Ms. Ordway, reading from that statute, provide written notice to the parents or guardians of all students enrolled in the school district at least 10 days before a public meeting to discuss the closing of a school. So not the decision, but discuss it within the school district. The notice shall include the reasons for the proposed closure and the time and the place of the meeting. Governing board shall fix a time for a public meeting on the proposed closure not less than 10 days before voting in a public meeting to close the school. So this is another notice that has to be sent to them. School district governing board shall give notice of the time and place of the meeting in that second notice. At the time and place of the designated, that's designated in the notice, the school district governing board shall hear reasons for or against closing the school. The school district governing board is exempt from this paragraph if the governing board determines that the school shall be closed because it poses a danger to the health and safety of pupils or employees of the school. Governing board may consult with the school facilities board for technical assistance and information on the impact of closing the school. The information provided from the school facilities board shall not require the governing board to take action which is actually, I think, the very first paragraph of this policy. So what's missing in here are the notices that are required prior to even having the discussion, as well as the notices that are required prior to having the meeting. And there is a community meeting, a public meeting that is required to hear community input about that.
Was this in place in the past then? Because there was a work session without notices going out to the school I worked at, and then after it was caught, I think they had the notices go out. I'm wondering if maybe if it was in policy too, there would have been more clarity.
It's been in law. It's just not in policy. And to be perfectly honest, everything we do is in law. We still have our policies. Our policies are still necessary, even though the laws are written. And an organization's policies are necessary, and it's necessary that they are applicable specifically to us. I find it, if we're going to go off of it's written in law, we don't really need it in our policy. Then why do we have policies at all? Let alone have someone else write it for us and send it to us. And if the board's only duty is to write policies, to enact policy, and someone else is already doing that for us, why do we have boards? I just think that the current system is a real disservice, and I think our policies need to be specific, and our parents need to be honored, and our parents need to be respected, and they need to be notified. This especially of all of the policies we have looked at tonight is extremely impacting to our communities and our families. When you find out 10 days notice that your school is going away, and you have a kindergartner who just made 30 friends, this is significant, and I think it should be in both policy, even though it's written in law. This is my opinion.
Dr. Finch?
Two thoughts. If it's written in state statute, we have to follow it. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. That's what you pay me for. That's what you pay Mr. Miglorino for, to not make those mistakes that you're referring to. And I get super nervous when we're talking about a big topic like this, retirement of facilities or selling property. This is highly regulated, and what I'm hearing from you is more education, which I don't disagree with. But as far as changing the law or adding to the law or adding to our policies to implicate or give the idea that we need to do more than the law, then this obviously needs to be run by the attorneys to protect us. So the sale of real properties is highly regulated. So it's in statute what we have to do. And if your district, in Ms. Tweedy's case, makes that mistake, then the voters can get all over them for that, and they'll get in major trouble. And that sounds like they caught themselves and redid the timeline, but it's highly regulated. But if there needs to be more education, I don't disagree with you that we need to make sure we follow the timelines, especially if that ever occurs.
Discussion from other board members.
President Frank, if I might just add one more thing. Also
Please
in
do.
1531, Section 37, whenever you would be considering the retirement of facility, which is this policy, you would also be subject to a boundary change. And there are other prescribed steps within the boundary, changing a school boundary, that are also very prescriptive. And those are contained in ARS 15341 as well.
Okay. And we are required, obviously, to follow that, what's in the law. Go ahead, Mrs. O'Brien.
Thank you. So, Dr. Finch, if we wanted to add the language that Mr. Miglorino so kindly just read us regarding the statutory requirements surrounding the closing of a school facility, are you still suggesting that would need to go to the lawyer for review if it is just merely to
Cut and paste.
do a cut and paste paragraph so that parents might more readily be able to locate that information? And quite frankly, I think that the students' rights and responsibilities is pretty thick and can seem onerous, and then our policy manual, or I should say manuals, which were 2 binders when they were handed to me as a new board member, are definitely a little overwhelming. I realize it's all online now, but a lot of parents don't even know that they're there, or community members.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what Mr. M is referring to by the legal note at the bottom there. You would note if you wanted to add, if there was other regulations that you wanted, you could add them there.
Right.
I don't think we would get in trouble by cutting and pasting the regulation, but maybe Mr. Miglierino has a thought on putting more state statute in there with the prescribed. Thoughts?
President Frank, members of the board, Dr. Finch, I don't believe that we can take any liberty with the policy that the board wants. We would remove the copyright insignia, and it would become a Deer Valley policy because we would alter
That's
what
true.
ASBA. But again, if we're merely copying and pasting from the statute, and it's maybe me reading it may have belabored the point. It's not as onerous as I may have made it sound, but my point also is this policy also refers you back to policy JC, which is the school attendance areas. So, and we have many policies like that actually, have an influence on one another, and so that's the reason for the reference. But if we were to just merely copy and paste from 15341 into the policy, it would be my opinion that wouldn't necessarily have to be go through a legal review. We would just want to make sure that it met the requirements, how it was organized by bringing it back to the board before it was considered.
Okay. Ms. Tweedy has a question.
So I would be happy with that change if we said additionally,
Just to add
the
the word
community
required.
input set forth by will be followed or something, and then cut and paste it so that they can see their notification rights.
And President Frank, Ms. Tweedy, actually and it sometimes get lost because of the way it's organized, but the last sentence of this policy, the way it reads now, is community members shall be provided an opportunity to address the considerations at the board meeting. So because that sentence is kind of out there hanging by itself, I think that might be a good transition to the requirements that are in 15341 to be able to use that as the segue, if you will, into that copy and paste.
And I agree, adding the language from the law, because it's intimidating, as you said, for parents to go through the board policy manual, but it's even more intimidating to start looking for revised statutes, if you even know where to look. So that would provide transparency and clarification to our community. So we have this a motion on the floor to...
Can I ask one more thing? Just I want
Sure.
to ask Mr. M. Could there be any unintended consequences by cutting and pasting? Do we have any liability coverage using ASBA's model if we say this did happen and somebody sued us? If it doesn't have the exact wording with ASBA, we don't pick up any extra coverage? Yes, no?
Dr. Finch, yeah, so we would not be able to get support from ASBA if the policy would to be challenged. But again, if we're merely grabbing the statute, I don't know that there's any more exposure that we would have, although ASBA would probably not feel that there's a need to cover any inquiry regarding the policy because it would be no longer theirs. I think the exposure we might have is making sure that whenever this statute changes, so whenever 15341 section 32 changes, we'll have to change our policy because we will not be dependent on ASBA to know that our policy has that reference
And,
specific to that language.
and to that point, because we do now have, I don't know how many, but there are several policies that have been revised while Mrs. Fisher and I were on the board. So could I ask Dr. Finch that we verify that when policies are coming in, policy updates are coming in, that we are doing our due diligence on the ones that have been modified by Deer Valley to make sure we're staying up with those legal changes. If you could let us know in a board update about that.
We actually do that every time they come in because they send them out blanket to everyone, and that's when it pops up when you when we compare them, it's like, oh, this has been modified by us.
Okay.
And so then the board will have to make a decision to go back to ASBA or continue with the policy. And we've actually done that. And I think Dr. Galligan talked about one just last week
Okay.
that we had changed. Maybe it was a sunscreen one or the headlights one. We said we're going to do our own gig on that.
Thing
Right.
with headlights.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's an example. So that actually pops up on our radar every time they send us one.
Okay, I just as a side note. Okay, well, I would, I guess, move to amend the motion to include the language from 341.
Regarding parent notification.
Hold on a second. I was trying to find paragraph 32, 1534.1.32 to be included in our policy FCB.
Following that last, is it the last sentence, Jim?
Yes.
Could you just read paragraph 32?
Could I read it for you? Sure. It says, it's the one Mr. Miglerino read. Do you want me to read it again?
It's the same thing you did.
It's the same exact thing. I just went and found the paragraph that he read to us about providing the written notice at least 10 days before any public meetings to discuss closing a school within the school district. That notice shall include proposed closure, time and place of meeting. We'll have the governing board will have a fixed time for a public meeting on proposed closures not less than 10 days before voting on a public meeting to close the school. And then more time and place. I mean, it's exactly what he read.
It's the same.
It's the same
statute.
exact. It's the statute Mr. Miglerino read.
Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so all those in favor of the amendment?
The amendment.
The amendment.
Aye.
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 Miss Sheila fired it up for us. No charge.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And now we need to vote on
Yes.
the actual motion as amended.
Okay, so I also vote aye. Are there any opposed?
Aye again.
Okay, so motion carries 5-0. And that is our last policy for the evening. I would, now we have to vote on the motion. I'm sorry. I got excited. I thought maybe we were done with the policies.
Voted on the motion, on the
We
motion.
did, we just revised.
We just voted on the amendment.
All right, we have to vote twice. We have to vote on the
Okay,
amendment
so all
and then we
those
have
in
to vote.
favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Sheila, which was the one that you just popped up? Wasn't that voting on the actual item?
Yes. That was the amendment.
Okay. So there won't be a secondary electronic.
Okay. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Okay, so now that is the end of the policies. I would like to take just a minute, point of privilege, and thank my fellow board members for the respectful and productive discussion on the policy revisions this evening. Okay, moving on to item 6, which is the consent agenda. I will need a motion.
I move that the governing board approve consent agenda items A through H.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Sorry. Does that one pop up?
I don't.
I've got nothing popping
There it
up.
is. Okay.
There I have it popping up.
I hit
Okay.
it wrong. Don't close it because I hit the wrong one. It popped up and moved. How do I get to change it? Just change it to it. There it goes.
Okay, so motion carries 5-0. We have 3 action items tonight, starting with action item 7A to approve employee travel.
I move that the governing board approves all employee out-of-state travel per governing board policy GCCE.
Second.
Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, waiting for our electronic version to pop up.
There it is.
I don't, not on my, oh, there it is. Okay. And the motion carries 5-0. Item 7B, addenda pre-approvals. I will need a motion.
I move that the governing board accept the administration's recommendation to pre-approve the addenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on this item or questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so the motion carries, I believe it's 4 ayes, 1 nay. 4-1. And then action item 7C, partial sale of district office parcel to ADOT.
Someone was too mad to read this motion. No.
Calm yourself down, Miss Tweedy.
I move that the governing board accept the administration's recommendation to accept the offer of $26,138 from the Arizona Department of Transportation for the property rights needed in connection with the Pima Freeway expansion project.
Second.
Questions or discussion on this item?
Mr. Migliorino can
Oh,
fill us
Mr.
in.
Migliorino? Okay.
He's been negotiating nicely.
Lightness.
Yeah, and they actually haven't been too cooperative, by the way. But hopefully he'll be nice tonight.
Did you try the just add 10% method and see if they bite?
President Frank, members of the board, Dr. Finch. So we were approached in August. There is a project to widen what we commonly refer to as the 101 freeway, specifically from Pima Road to I-17. One lane in either direction, both east and westbound. Part of that is going to require 2 lanes just adjacent to our property. So they're going to have to reconfigure portions of the area. So this not only affects us, but our neighbors as well. This is a small portion of the parking lot that they're looking to acquire. It's about 10 feet of real property. It's 20 feet of a construction easement so that they can construct the wall on the new property line. That'll be 10 feet in so that they have room to work on both sides. We have to relocate one of our parking lights, but it is the parking lot, so there's really not anything that we're compromising. Those of us that travel down the 101 freeway can appreciate maybe adding some lanes to it due to the traffic that
I
we
would
experience.
concur with that.
And the only one thing that was, I'll say, a discussion point with the folks from the Department of Transportation is, so a portion of our southern wall will be a sound wall. The new wall will be a sound wall. The existing wall will remain. So there'll be a transition, but there already is now. It's just not on our property. And their sound engineers have actually determined where the sound wall needs to begin and end. It is a design build project, so they don't actually have a hard bid for this particular project. So it is subject to change, so it could be something that they come back and say, well, we need to extend the sound wall based on the actual design. So the agreement tonight is the agreement to sell that portion of the land. It is a sound wall agreement as well as that's contained in the documentation that you see there. And pending the outcome of the vote, we will execute all the agreements to be able to effectively make this happen. Before you start making plans to travel down the freeway, the new widened freeway in the near future, this process takes a long time. This is the very first step in the process for them to acquire all of the appropriate right-of-ways, and so this will be years in the making before it'll be a finished project.
So if we hold up the vote tonight, we'll just be delaying your access to extra room on the freeway, Mr.
Oh, no, they're
Migliorino?
actually going to file a
And
complaint.
actually
are you
threatened
suggesting,
us.
though, are you suggesting that if we give ADOT an inch, they might literally take a mile?
Yes.
Yeah, they
Okay.
were going to
All
do
right,
the
just wanted to be
eminent
clear.
domain on us.
Oh, they said they're filing right on us.
Yeah, they
eminent
were going to
domain.
file on us
Yeah.
if we didn't. So
I
thanks
have
for.
a question.
It's like
Go ahead,
we
Mrs.
have a board
Ordway.
meeting and it takes time. We just don't have meetings every day. So have a little patience, and then I guess Mr. Migliorino talked them all away from the cliff.
Did you stick them in the 101 traffic on hold? I was just wondering, with the sound wall, as part of your negotiation, perhaps a Deer Valley logo, as part of the beautification of the wall, would be in order. A deer would be awesome.
President Frank, Ms. Ordway, I know that the actual design of the sound wall actually is very purposeful. So it's fluted tilt wall that actually.
Deers move.
is very purposeful in terms of deadening the sound. So I don't think that there's room. We did not ask, I will confess, but I don't think there's room for them to make an exception.
To that point, Mrs. Order, maybe we could just put out our own deer crossing sign. That would grab some attention.
Awesome.
people traveling
Because
down
we
the
did deny
101.
them their 15th Avenue exit when they were building the 101. So maybe we'll get a deer out.
Oh, we'll work on that.
And I should note that because I think this will affect us, the 15th Avenue Bridge has to be extended because the lanes are going to be wider. So that likely could cause some traffic concerns for us. But anyhow, that is also part of it. The 15th Avenue Bridge has to be longer to span the added lanes.
Okay, I hate to say this, but does that give teachers more room to protest when we're negotiating? I'm sorry, as a teacher, I was out on that bridge a couple of times, so perhaps I shouldn't bring that
There
up.
will be more elbow room.
Okay, all right.
Will it be metal enclosed with a deer theme to it? Pushing that deer thing, I'm sorry.
Okay, the fact that they're threatening eminent domain makes me just want to vote no.
Well, they're going to take it anyway.
Well,
so
yeah,
Right.
we're
we might
going to
as well get
lose because
our
they're the bigger
$26
government, but it's just, I mean, I won't do it because we'll lose, but that really infuriates
It
me.
irritates you, doesn't it?
It's just common practice. They used to do it. That's why I asked if you did the 10%, because Kevin always said, just add 10% and see if they'll give it to you. And a lot of times they did. So, but you'll lose anyways.
Okay. Are we ready to vote on this
Oh,
item?
please.
All right, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 5-0. We have one preview item, revision of public comment, the everyone's favorite public comment admonishment.
What?
Yes.
Our preview item. Who's previewing it for us?
It's an attachment
Attachment.
in there. What we did was checked with the attorney. I actually was given the advice to go check with the attorney. Turns out you are the governing institution over your meetings. So the admonishment that we normally read, we can put on the back sheet of paper and have them sign it and don't have to read it. But we can, and if you want to take it up a notch, you could ask them at the podium, have you read and signed but you don't have to.
Could we then ask them to read it instead of us having to read it?
I think
No,
the point
okay.
is to shrink the clock. So
Okay.
that's the point.
I would,
It is legal.
I don't want to read I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to admonish adults for on and on and on and on.
Well, I don't know. I think that we talk about being transparent, informational, and have everyone understand what rules are. And if we take that away, it doesn't take all that long to read it. God knows I read it a million times. We could change the words, but I really don't think that we stop saying it. You say it once, you don't have to read it for everyone. You say it once during public comment.
Do you really think people appreciate hearing our admonishment?
It really doesn't matter if people appreciate it. It matters that it's there to be heard, because we're not going to poll every single person that's listening to say, oh, did you appreciate having to hear that? I think it's part of a protocol that
I think if you just post your rules, they could read it. They're adults.
Well,
I mean, it's
ask
kind of
it.
like treating our speakers like they're a little bit unintelligent.
Well, that's part of my concern. And it's not that they're lacking in intelligence. There are a lot of people in this world who, for whatever reasons, cannot read or have issues reading or have. I met a former coworker from when I worked at the city today who had, she had to retire early because she had cancer, and the result of her treatment, it prevented her from being able to read and comprehend on all situations. And that was kind of where my concern went as well, is what if you do have that person? And I will tell you, if you have an adult walk up to this podium and you tell them, did you read and acknowledge that on the back of a statement, if they cannot read or for whatever reason are unable to comprehend, they are not going to tell you because they're going to be humiliated. And I just,
Yeah, you don't have to ask them. They can just sign it.
Right, but if they can't read, what are they? I am just concerned.
Okay,
We
can I
really only read it
suggest-
once, but perhaps we could shorten it because we lengthened it.
Can I touch?
This
Years ago.
this was actually my fault. I'm the one that's suggesting it because that's how I did it in Michigan. It was just to shorten meetings and I kind of was on the same thought with Miss Tweedy that it was language that was not very flowery, and so I didn't. That's why
Unfriendly,
unfriendly,
perhaps?
maybe the proper term.
Well, we did.
But
we
Ms.
did
Fisher has a
lengthen
point.
it.
If someone can't read, then you are missing that. You could put it up behind on the screen while they're speaking, and again, you have it. But another plus of having them sign it is that if there is an issue, then legally you have something to go with, versus whether I heard it or not because I came in late.
We can't
so
really
that's-
do anything to him anyway, but
I was
ask
gonna
him
say,
to stop
what would
speaking.
you do?
You haven't been watching Michigan board meetings then?
Actually, we can turn
can.
the microphone off on them, which means we need to be careful because we could be violating their First Amendment rights.
Right.
And so the language that was provided, I have a couple questions if I may. The language that was provided for what is the back of the form is different than what we read now.
I think it's your board policy version.
Okay, so it's just
According to Denise Lowbritt,
okay.
the one that you've adopted. And
Yeah, what you've handed us isn't what we read. It's
you
or policy
you made the point
BEDH.
that you actually changed it or added to it.
Right, we did.
Pick either one.
Right, that was a David Can't Tell Me thing.
Got it.
So I was just trying to help, but if it's not helpful, that's fine too.
It's not something we're voting on tonight. It's just a discussion,
Yeah,
preview discussion item. So
At the
we
very
could.
least, I'd like us to compromise and shorten it.
So you want to? Well, then that would be different language, though. I don't have a problem with our public, our policy BEDH, public participation at governing board meetings, being on the back and us asking them to be signed. And then what I would recommend, or I would second Ms. Tweedy's motion or idea to shorten the admonishment language. I think in full disclosure, I was one of those people who had the microphone shut off on me while I was a parent speaking at district office because I used a governing board member's name.
Mhm.
That is not allowed. We are elected officials. They can use our names, whether we like it or not, what they say about us. But I've also then sat here for 3.5 years and watched other governing board presidents admonish public speakers for saying board members' names. So we need to be careful because I was advised when it happened to me that I could sue the district. It's not a path I chose to go down. So I do feel strongly about this policy and that we are careful, one, about giving our public the right to speak when they come, and also protecting our staff, because not all governing boards have protected our staff either, because it does apply to staff members. Their names should not be used in an area where they cannot defend themselves. Most of the times those staff members are not here. So I like the idea of having it on the back and having them sign it. I think that's a great idea, actually. I still would like something to be read, and I'm all for it being more brief, as long as, we make sure as board members we understand they can say our name and that we need to protect our staff, though.
I could have the attorney could do a shorter version.
Okay.
We could shorten it ourselves, but I'm going to run it through the attorney either way. So
Why
can
don't
do
you
it that
have
way.
the attorney look
I
at
can
it?
actually. I think it might be better if we try to shorten it ourselves first, and then have him give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. I would hope that would cost us a little less money if we just say
We provided
No, they'll
the
charge me the
wording.
same.
Well,
Hello,
don't-
this is Kurt. Oh, that's 500.
I don't
What
want
else?
them
What do
to
you have
start.
say?
I don't want them to start from scratch and make it 1,000. So
Right.
maybe we could, cut it down.
If you want to,
And what we had is a study session, and we lengthened it. They reviewed it and said it was fine. So I think it's best that we reduce it and then let them review
Do
So
it.
you
do we
wanna
want to
have
each bring our
someone-
ideas for shortening?
Should we put this as a discussion item on a future board agenda?
Sure, sounds like
Yeah.
a
Right?
party.
Could we in the next open, or sorry, not open. What's the word I'm looking for? Thursday update. Have maybe our old version be provided.
Sure.
And then we all have the new version in our
Can work
policy
with that.
manual, and then we could submit
So you would
or
look
have
at-
it as an item to then to discuss. And
you can send your ideas to me, and I could shrink it. You just can't send it to each other.
Right, but if you could send
Right.
us the language
The original.
from
Yep, yep.
pre-2014 language,
I can send you the board policy
and then the current
other one
language,
and the
then
new
we
one.
can look at
Yep.
it and send suggestions.
Yep,
And
that'd
then
work.
if you want to revise it based on our suggestions, and then
Bring it to
bring
the group,
it back, bring it
Okay.
back to the group at a
and then
at
we'll
the
just
next
then we'll have
meeting.
attorney look at it after we decide if we like it or not. How's that sound?
Okay, that sounds like a plan.
You're going to do that, and then we'll have it as a discussion item?
We'll have it as a discussion item. Yeah.
we don't need a vote to implement
No.
the public
Do it.
the change of adding our policy on the back, right? That could just be done.
Correct. It's on there.
It's already on there.
Yeah, we just added the signature line.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome idea.
Okay. All right, so the last item on the agenda is a discussion item to determine a date to hold the study session regarding DVUSD social, emotional, and suicide prevention programs. So I just wanted to bring this to the board so we could set a date. That is something we did indicate to community members we would have a study session on, so so we need to set a date for that. It seems that in the past, having it on a Tuesday that is a non-board meeting has worked best for everyone's schedules. So, Dr. Finch, do you have a suggestion for a date for the board?
Okay. They're on there. In the summary, there's Miss Sheila's actually Miss Taylor's looked for the actual dates where this room is open. So they are on there, the 12th, the 15th, the 17th, and the 30th of October are the next four. The 9th we could do before, but that might time constrain us. So
I
thinking
will
the
not-
12th, 15th, 17th, or the 30th, and 17th is my birthday, so my wife's
That sounds
birthday,
like
so I
perfect time.
probably won't be
Like
here.
that? We could
I,
have cake
I will
and
not be
steak.
here on the 9th, and I will not be available on the
We have the 12th, 15th, or 30th, if you want to do it in October. October the 12th is a Friday. October 15th is a Monday, and October 30th is a Tuesday. Those are the three where this room is open.
Okay, I can't, I mean, I set my schedule up so that I have Tuesdays available, and I'd have to go back to my work schedule, which is insane to figure out a date other than a
Would the 30th?
Tuesday.
Ms.
October
Frank, I think the Tuesday, whatever that Tuesday is,
October
October
30th.
people are already programmed in their head to spend Tuesdays with us. So,
How late though? Because I have to chaperone a Halloween dance.
we could start. That's scary.
It's gonna be
On a
over.
Tuesday?
6 o'clock?
What's the day before Halloween?
Oh,
Yeah.
So
okay, yeah,
what
I guess it is.
what time do you need to be done by, Miss Tweedy?
I think it will be done about 4:30, so I could probably.
Oh.
oh,
We're
well,
not
that's
gonna-
fine. We don't
right,
start till
we
7,
wouldn't
right?
start. We wouldn't
6
start until
o'clock.
6:30 or 6
Oh.
or 6:30, right?
Yeah,
Oh, good,
6:30.
okay.
For 6
Okay.
o'clock for a study session.
6, and we'd have
6:30
to run home.
or 6.
Which pick. Just tell me what time to plug in. 6 or 6:30.
Why don't we say 6?
6 o'clock, October 30th, Tuesday.
Okay.
Does that mean that we'll be done by 8?
Yes.
Bring your outfits, your Halloween outfits.
No clowns. I'll bring heads up Harry with me.
Bring lots of candy
And that
for
will
me.
be here in the board meeting room, correct, Dr. Finch?
We'll also live stream it as well. The study session.
It's a study session so that community members may
Correct.
speak to the board.
And
And
will
I-
Mrs. Taylor email the parents that spoke on the topic?
The ones that we are in
Right.
contact with, yes.
Yes.
Yes, those ones.
We'll probably advertise on social media,
Well,
et cetera, as well.
of course, we do a great job on that as well. But
Okay, so that will be the date for the study session. Future meeting dates and events are posted. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
so moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, meeting is adjourned at the early
50.
hour of 8:50.
Ever been a case where somebody opposes and